So Donald Trump's DOJ can't even keep its own story straight for more than one day at a time now. I've been covering this whole debacle with the James Comey grand jury indictment because it really needs some unwinding to truly expose just what a bungled job it really was, or whether there's something more nefarious than being bungled. What a difference a day makes? Yesterday, we covered this headline. Today, this one. DOJ reverses its stance. It's like now you see it, now you don't, right? Did the indictment get seen? Did it get voted on, or didn't it? How is the Trump DOJ trying to square this ridiculous inconsistency? Well, they filed a new memorandum to the quote with actual quotes from a court transcript that supposedly support their position that the Comey indictment, the correct version of it, really was presented to the grand jury. What to make of this? Let's take a look. But before we do that, let me remind you, hit that subscribe button, make us the biggest and the best, get us to 1 million because we are very, very close. Let's review what happened in the last hearing. When the issue arose, when the judge pressed the Justice Department Assistant U.S. Attorney about whether or not the indictment had been presented to the grand jury. After conferring privately with Lindsey Halligan, the beauty queen turned U.S. attorney, handpicked by Trump, Tyler Lemons, an assistant prosecutor from a different district, because apparently, as we all know, Halligan can't find anyone in the Eastern District of Virginia to work on the case with her. Mr. Lemons conferred with his boss, the U.S. attorney, and then acknowledged that the revised indictment was not shown to all of the grand jurors. Quote, "I was not there, but that is my understanding, Your Honor," Lemons told the judge, meaning it's my understanding it wasn't shown to the grand jury. The judge, Nakhimov, then called Halligan to the podium, very unusual, to basically make her a witness, asked her who was in the courtroom when the final indictment was presented to the magistrate. Okay, that's when they say, here's the indictment, Your Honor. She said only 2 grand jurors, including the foreperson, were there. Obviously not the entire grand jury. At that point, Michael Dreeben, Comey's lawyer, understanding the significance of this, then argued to the court, there's no indictment. The indictment was never actually presented to the grand jury. Recall what the origin story here was, that originally when the grand jury had supposedly done its work, Halligan, on her first day and first time ever presenting a case to a grand jury, gave the magistrate judge not 1 indictment, but 2, and they were conflicting. The first one appeared to be a no bill of the whole case. That's what it said. But there's a handwritten notation in different ink than the signatures that the grand jury had only no billed count 1, but had voted in favor of counts 2 and 3. However, Halligan also gave the judge a second indictment, which only had counts 2 and 3, what I call the cleaned up version. That's version 2. That judge had been very confused, saying this had never happened before, being handed 2 conflicting indictments. Halligan basically explained it away, saying that the second indictment was the correct one, implicitly that the grand jury had considered it and voted upon it. The judge accepted it, Comey gets indicted. At that time, before that judge, was the grand jury foreperson, which is typical when they're returning it, basically attesting, yeah, that's really my signature to the indictment. And apparently there's one other grand juror present there too, for some reason. Fast forward to the hearing, the most recent one, where Halligan and the other DOJ attorney admit that this number 2 indictment, the real indictment, was never voted upon by the grand jury, so it's not a real indictment. This caused a huge problem with Comey's attorney saying, okay, we got to kick the case, and once you dismiss it, Your Honor, it's barred because the statute of limitations ran. So DOJ, being directed by the judge to better make an argument about this, they made an argument which is really boils down to, Your Honor, this was just a technical problem because there should not be any question over whether the grand jury heard evidence about counts 2 and 3. They did, that's in the transcript, and they were willing to indict on counts 2 and 3. So no harm, no foul, it's just a paperwork problem. Of course, it's more than just a paperwork problem because the paperwork here is the indictment the grand jury was supposed to see and vote upon. Think about it for a second. There's this very unusual situation to begin with that they no-billed count 1. That very rarely happens with grand juries declining anything. So that's already kind of a wrinkle here. Then you have the 2 really confusing points that 1 indictment is given to the judge. It says everything's rejected by the grand jury, but there's a handwritten notation that says, no, not really, 2 and 3 are okay. And then there's a second one that only has 2 and 3, right? A lot of messiness, a lot of questions. In that scenario, I think about this. If you had presented that second version to the grand jury, they might have had some questions to make sure, is this what we voted on? Maybe they just want to make sure what happened with the first count. those would naturally be questions. If it was never presented to them, they never had the chance to ask those questions. There's another wrinkle to this too, but we'll save that for a moment. So, if they never showed that version of the indictment to them, to me, that's a substantive problem. It's not just a paperwork issue, especially considering that suspicious inconsistency with the first one saying, oh, actually, we no-billed the whole thing. Now, DOJ is trying to clean this up. So they do an additional filing to the court where they want to claim that, oh, we are correcting the record for the court. And actually, that second indictment, the cleaned up document, really was presented to the grand jury, and it really was voted upon. So, take a look at what they submitted. They style this correction, and they say, quote, statements suggesting an issue with the grand jury process. How mysterious, these statements. Gosh, who made those statements? It makes it sound like somebody is trying to confuse the judge. Who made the statements? They did. DOJ made the statements. The Assistant U.S. Attorney Lindsey Halligan both testified to that fact, that the second indictment was not presented to a full grand jury and voted upon, and the Assistant U.S. Attorney also testified to that fact, saying that was his understanding. Okay. They also say that their correction, quote, conclusively refutes that claim. Whose claim is that? Again, this mysterious notion they're refuting something. It's their own claim. They're the ones that said that happened. So now, instead of saying we're correcting, we were mistaken, they try to make it sound like there's somebody they're going against when they're the ones they're going against. You know, it's a well-used technique in debate and in legal arguments to have a straw man, but usually the straw man isn't yourself. So, what's the conclusive proof they want to give of this? They use some excerpts from the transcript of the day when Halligan showed up with the grand jury foreperson and these two conflicting indictments. Now, put up that little excerpt. So the foreperson does seem to be saying they voted on the clean version with counts 2 and 3. The next excerpt, the foreperson said, 3 counts should really be 1 count? Oops, there ended up being 2 counts? Like, okay, that's again a problem, right? There wasn't 1 count in the final version, there were 2 counts. And the foreperson refers to it being put in a package. You mean a package like the indictment? The foreperson's not using the right terminology. They're not a lawyer, they're a layperson. So it's possible that the foreperson was pretty stressed out, given this confusion, being questioned by the judge directly, and basically misspoke. What they meant to say is that we definitely voted to indict on counts 2 and 3, and this cleaned up document reflects that. That's a lot of explanation for this kind of cryptic remark, and for a remark that shouldn't have to be made at all, because the indictment needs to simply speak for itself. So really, what does this new transcript excerpt show? It's DOJ's attempt to clarify its own position, meaning reverse its own position, while pretending that they're refuting somebody's claim when they're actually refuting their own claim. They're contradicting themselves. It only adds more questions here, because how is it possible that the Assistant U.S. Attorney, Mr. Lemons, told the judge after conferring with Halligan that was his understanding the second indictment was never presented to the whole grand jury? And adding to the point is the government's trying to claim, I can say this a lot better than they did, that it really was essentially presented to the full grand jury because they heard the evidence, they voted on those 2 counts. Except for this problem. It's contradicted by the excerpts that were just put up there by the government, the ones we showed you. Because those excerpts don't say it was essentially voted upon. Those excerpts have the foreperson saying it actually was voted upon. The cleaned-up indictment was presented to us, and we voted upon it. That's what DOJ wants to make it sound like. Here's a big problem with that. The original problem that began all this, hours of missing transcript, and the judge had told Halligan, hey, the timeline you gave me is impossible. You said that you learned that there was a no bill on count 1, but 7 minutes later you showed up with these 2 indictments. You couldn't possibly have typed up the second indictment, gave it to the grand jury for a vote, had them vote on it, and showed up in 7 minutes. Unsaid by the judge is, if that really happened, where the hell is the transcript? That's the missing 2 hours, right? That all had to have been recorded because you would have gone to the grand jury and said, hey, this is cleaned up indictment. You already voted on it. Ask you to vote on it again. If that is what happened, there's no recording of it. So that's another problem. All roads here lead to enormous confusion, enormous ineptitude, and possibly false representations being made to the court in a frantic attempt to cover up what was really happening. Was it just massive incompetence? Quite possible. massive incompetence with a terrific price for DOJ because of the statute of limitations problem? Or was it something more nefarious than that? We'll keep an eye on it. Now you see it, now you don't.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.